Hello and welcome to What Matters Water TV and Podcast. I'm Charlie Wilson, and today we have a story about math. Really, really big math. So here's the number for you, 9 million. That's 9 million acre-feet of water that California will be short by the year 2040. Now, I know what you're thinking, an acre-foot. What kind of water wonk speech is that? It sounds really made up, but that's real. It's 326,000 gallons, enough water for 2 families for a year. Track with me. That means we're talking about being short of water for 18 million people. Gone, poof, not available. Now, you might think, hey, California has an ocean. It's right there. Just make some desalination plants. And you'd be right to think that. Except that this is where the math gets really, really wild. To replace just the state water project from Northern California to Southern California with desalination, you would need a massive plant every 4 miles along the entirety of the California coast. That's every 4 miles. Now, that comes from Karla Nemeth. And for 8 years, under 2 different governors, she has run the California Department of Water Resources, which means she's basically been the person trying to solve an impossible puzzle. How do you provide 40 million people, farms that feed the world, and the environment water when Mother Nature keeps changing the rules? So today we're bringing you our full and candid conversation with Director Nemeth about some hard facts about balancing rapidly changing weather patterns, demands for water, and what it means for policymakers as we look toward a new governor, and why the word flexibility just might save California. Stay with us. Let's dive in, shall we?
So Karla, thanks for being with us. I want to really get into today talking about the hard realities, right? We talk a lot, we do a lot of happy talk of planning and whatnot. But as I look at these things in our experience, there's some real hard realities with our climate volatility and the system and the limits. And I want to kind of open with sort of your perspective with all the climate change that we've had. And we're clearly getting it in more extremes. And this year is no exception. Is it an issue that we've got problems with the system? Or are we navigating things correctly? What's the real truth and sort of where we are in managing water with the state?
There are a lot of hard realities. And water is part of, I think, a whole universe of hard realities that is challenging everybody across the board, no matter really what sector you're in. For water, though, I think there are 3 hard realities that are upon us. If you don't embrace them, I don't think it means you're under a rock. I just think it means you're busy. And we are the water provider, so it's our job to face them. And I really think it's 3 things. The first, you alluded to. There's just a lot of volatility in our system, the way the precipitation comes in. This is a perfect year to describe something that, wasn't on our charts and graphs that we have come to rely on, really looking at the past 100 years. And part of what's really driving that is the interaction between temperature and precipitation patterns. And this year was an interesting year. We came off our hottest March on record. We blew the record out of the water by about 3.5 degrees. What that did was we had an okay snowpack at the beginning of March. I think we were at about 70% of average. Not great, not bad. But it was the heat, not just the lack of precipitation in March, but it was the heat that generated this very quick melt off. And then we realized by the end of March, our snowpack peak was actually February 24th. And we make a lot of decisions right now in California based off a snowpack that we measure on April 1st.
Well, isn't that though part of the issues? Like we have 100 years and we've built this system for 100 years ago. And that doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
I mean, I kid lots of people. We got to hot March and it's like, oh, well, Charlie, it's raining and it's snowing. So we're good, right?
Right.
Well, no, you could do the snowpack survey in, flip-flops and shorts because there was no snow. And if your modeling is in that sort of system, that becomes, for me, it's like, okay, that's different. And it's on a now.
Right. And I think that's my second point right there, right? Is the hard truth is this isn't something that's happening in 2050. Even it's not something that's happening at the end of the century. It's actually happening now. And that's both a challenge and an opportunity. But I think that actually leads me to my third point, which is, we're going to have to get uncomfortable with the uncertainty of it all, right? Do we know enough to make lots of decisions and rebuild our system at this moment? I think we do. I think that's a hard truth we have to start embracing. We know enough to move forward and faster than what we're able to do right now.
But then who's the we, right?
Right.
Is it
Yeah.
the water experts and those of us that work every day and understand that? Because the decisions are made, across the street. There are folks in public policy arenas that have lots of hard truths they're trying to reconcile.
Sure.
How do we get through there? I mean,
Right.
lots of engineers,
Right.
we can build and design anything. Is it facilities or is it, our system? Is it our policy and how we operate the system?
I think it's both. And I think we're kind of moving in fits and starts. And what's become really clear to me is that, we're making progress in certain parts of the state. We're pushing on big kinds of infrastructure projects. Because water is locally managed in the state, there's a real unevenness in terms of how we approach it. And I think what we're seeing now, what is really manifest, is, even if you as a local water district are wanting to adapt to this hydrology, the processes that we have to, work through our permitting, et cetera, they're just not nimble enough to enable us to put projects on the table that are actually affordable, because the longer we wait, the more expensive it gets. And so I think that's one, real challenge. And I think, Charlie, what's really missing from that is we don't have a real comprehensive set of projects and the things we need to adapt to and reform to achieve those projects. We're right on the verge of that, but we're not quite there. And we need a big push to get there. The legislature started that big push with Senate Bill 72, which is an updated California water plan. And that's a real push that California needs.
Well, we're 8 years into the last iteration of the water plan.
Right.
What would be the great successes that came from that? How do we use that then as the jumping off point, as the learning point for this next iteration?
Right.
Because I can clearly see that, as you described. We have big issues the state has to address.
Right.
And yeah, that's right. We talked before. The state has not done a great job over the last 60 years in really investing in big projects.
Right.
And so we still have that work to do. And it's falling more and more to local projects, which, the great thing about California, it's really big and diverse. The really terrible thing about California, we're really big and really diverse.
Right.
And so when you get down to the local level, what works for me in my region does not necessarily work for somebody in another region. And so how do you bridge that gap?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think what you're touching on, and I would say, I think we have a sort of degree of decision paralysis, not just at the state, but also at the local level. And because everyone's kind of looking at risk, right? If you're a local water provider, it's like, what can I really rely on? And, if you're investing in bigger, larger scale solutions and they're affordable ones, but they're taking too long, they become less and less affordable. But then you start looking at, the sort of the value proposition of those big kinds of solutions. So State Water Project moves water to 27 million Californians. If you wanted to replace the State Water Project supplies, like writ large, just with desal, and I'm saying this as just a point of comparison, it's not a live strategy, nor should it be, because what I'm about to say will make you go, oh my goodness. What you would need to do, just in terms of the volume, is you would need to have a Carlsbad-sized desalination plant every 4 miles off the coast of California. I don't think Californians are going to want to industrialize their coastline. One, it's also water that's really expensive. And so I think, that's where our, you know, lack of a comprehensive strategy in Sacramento is pushing locals into different,
Right.
kinds of decision frameworks that also just really run into a brick wall. It's just we haven't hollered at each other about that brick wall enough, but it's there, right? And it's also fraught with, you know, all kinds of challenges to building things, and it is expensive. And so that's, to me, what we also have to get real about is we can't get into this or that. We have to get into a real conversation about how these things interact, big projects with smaller local resilience projects. And we need to get into a real conversation about the cost and value.
Well, it strikes me that's a very similar conversation of what I lived through in the energy world,
Mhm.
right? When we
Sure.
deregulated energy in California, it became somebody else's issue,
Yes.
right? We'll transmit, we'll do. Now you go find it
Yes.
wherever you can find it. Doing that in water sounds like it would be rather dangerous. But as you described, we do have some significant legislation. We've now sort of laid out, yes, the state's going to be short X percent. That's going to require about 9 million acre feet. Only water people
Mhm.
understand what that really means.
Right.
But it's a lot of water.
Right.
And where are we going to develop that? Is that going to be something that is the state's responsibility? Is that the responsibility of locals? Or what is the allocation? What is the right combination so that you're not completely dependent? Too much, my observation is, it's your problem. Let somebody else deal with it.
Right.
I'm elected here locally. It's the state's responsibility. It's much more fun to criticize the state than it is for me to take that on myself and then build. Now, if I reverse that, well, let the state off the hook. The state can't do it, won't do it, whatever
Right.
that excuse
Right.
is. Well, now I have to do it all myself. And then the struggles they go through of putting that in place. Either
Mhm.
way,
Mhm.
we're talking 10, 15, 20, 30 years to make up what is happening right now.
Right. Right.
So I guess the question is, because government's never known for being super highly efficient, it's not a knock, it's just a reality, right? It's a system that's designed to move slowly.
Yes.
Do we need to also be talking about reforming how we put those things in place, the interaction between agencies? I mean,
Mhm.
I would love for the locals to be able to say, we come together in unison to say,
Mhm.
this is what we need.
I would love that too, Charley.
And we just
No,
don't,
no,
right?
no, no.
So
So,
how do we
yeah,
navigate that path?
a couple of reactions. If we status quo ourselves into that, the people that will lose, I guarantee it, are the California water ratepayers. Full stop. They're going to pay that bill. And that's one of the things I think that can and should get people's attention wherever you are, whether you're on a board of a local water agency, whether you're representing your constituency in Sacramento, and whether you're an employee of the Department of Water Resources or an employee of other agencies that have really important roles to make sure the work that we do is not just not damaging the environment, but also, water is part of the environment, and the environment is also adapting. All the species and that rely on it, they are also adapting to climate. So we all have to understand that, doing this helps nobody. So not only does it not help the California ratepayer, it also does not help the environment. It really doesn't. And so that's kind of one reaction. I think that we have made a lot of progress in the last 8 years. And let me paint a little picture for you about what that progress has been about. So we have made a lot of progress in 8 years, and that progress was in reaction to these big changes that we're seeing, right? And so, so I talked a little bit about our hot March, and that was actually not the lowest snowpack in California. That was actually 2015. But what we learned since then was a really intense drought that we had in 2021 and 2022. And that really focused us on not just the precipitation, but actual warming temperatures. And what is the role of warming temperatures in creating a new pressure on precipitation that turns into water supplies for our management, for communities, the economy, and the environment. And it was in that moment where we really understood two things. One was we have enough information to get us off our duff. And that's where the 9 million acre feet by 2040 came in. It's actually probably more of a range, what is really going to happen because there is uncertainty. But we thought there was enormous value in saying, we need to start moving and getting somewhere. So what is a target that we understand and generally can support is going to evolve over time as we learn new things, but get us focused on the reality ahead, that if we do nothing, things will get worse and worse for Californians. And then the second thing we understood is every time we go into a drought, our strategy can't be, let's ask Californians to conserve. We need to do that. We're moving ahead intensely with water use efficiency, but that is not the whole picture. And once we rolled into 2023 and it started to rain, that was the second piece of it. It's like, okay, so now we've got a lot of water and snow in our system. Now the pressure is really on us to articulate, what are we building? How are we operating to save that water for the drought that we know is coming? So all of that leads me to my final point, is the importance of having a target and letting that target evolve as we invest in improved forecasting, because we need to know what's coming in to optimize our existing system. That's the most affordable thing we can do. And then we need to better understand long-term trends to figure out then where do we invest to, make them bigger, like San Luis Dam, or, operate them differently and then construct a, groundwater. So, what are the things we need to do to do that? And my experience is, if we're a little better, well, not a little, I don't know why I'm hedging. If we're a lot better at describing the problem we're solving, we will be more effective in Sacramento as water managers. We all have these intuition, if it were more flexible, we could solve problems better. Yes, but we got to get a lot of clarity on the actual problem we're solving and who we're solving it for, which needs to include all Californians. And we need to be thinking about the role that water plays in putting the environment on a better path to adapt as well.
Well, let me put a finer point on that, because where we started, right, it's different now, right?
Right.
We're a bit more like a stormwater management system than a snowpack system. That is fundamentally different kinds of facilities, notwithstanding we need to operate it differently. So if you're looking at 9 million acre feet that's just the drop.
Right.
That has nothing to do with the other 90% that is still there, right? And we have to figure out how to manage that. So what kinds of facilities at the state perspective do you see that make the biggest difference over the next 30 years?
Yeah. So I think we have to stabilize our big systems. I think we have to stabilize the State Water Project, and we have projects to do that. A couple of them, we have an actual climate adaptation strategy for the State Water Project, which is meant to acknowledge less snow, more rain. And I think at the heart of that is the Delta Conveyance Project, which is something that I think is important in ways that kind of get lost in the shuffle, if you will, in that it's not just we have real instability in our water transmission system in the California Delta, things like sea level rise, adding to pressure, there's significant earthquake risk. But when we get these big, flashy storm events, what we're doing right now is, those storm events send signals to salmon to start migrating, and we don't want to capture them at the pumps. And so what we do is we actually turn them down.
Mm.
because we don't want to start collecting and
Very
endangered fish.
counterintuitive in a rain event. It's like, okay,
counterintuitive.
I'm turning the pumps
Exactly.
down.
And there isn't really I don't think just, doing that a little bit better is enough. We have to change the physical infrastructure, and that's why the Delta Conveyance Project is so important. It's because it puts, that water diversion in a different physical location that enables us to move water with less interruption for salmon species, just real physical things. And so in our climate adaptation strategy, that, not a surprise, figures quite prominently. And where do we put that water, right? When we move it. So in years like 2017, we moved as much as we could, and we didn't have a place to sort of put the rest, if you will. So that really starts to get us into a discussion about storage. So storage, after we move the water, past the delta, I think the biggest opportunity is underground storage. Underground storage, largely in the Central Valley. That's where we have the most depleted aquifers and our biggest physical challenges. So that, I think, offers extraordinary opportunity. And the capacity of those aquifers is like 10 to 12 times the size of our current surface water. It doesn't behave exactly the same, to be clear. It takes longer to get into the ground, and it takes longer to pull it out. But it is a resource, and there's multiple benefits to getting that water into the ground. The other thing we also need are more what we would call kind of regulating reservoirs, meaning we were talking about that snowpack, and that snowpack is melting. We rely on that in better years than this one, Charlie. We rely on that through the duration of our warm season to start melting. It provides this steady inflow into our reservoirs. So that's our challenge with this year. We've got fairly above average reservoirs, but we have little snowpack. And so that's where a reservoir like Sykes Reservoir, which is off stream, it's not up in the Sierra Nevada, that enables us to, when it starts to really come, when we have these big booming storms, we can park that water in a reservoir. The thing that we forget about that reservoir is it also plays a role in supporting the environment. That's what the voters voted on in 2014. And so if that project comes to fruition, it also has really important water supplies that can help our wildlife refuges, because those are also areas that are affected by water availability when more comes as rain and we're not able to capture it.
Well, you're really talking, though, I mean, I'm overly simplifying all of this, but it sounds like, right, what we're moving towards or where we're at is more like annualized tsunamis than, or what we're used to, right? And then all of the participants in this, because at bottom line, this becomes a political issue for people and their willingness and ability to accept.
Sure.
Change is hard. Change is really hard. How do I get over that hump then? Because at the end of the day, we can take these things. We still got to come to the legislature, and then there's, the factions, and we kind of go through all of that. But I want to ask an additional question, because it doesn't get any better when we're talking about hard truths, because not only have you got these issues on the state system, of which you are expert and you operate and you try to do, we're trying to make a difference here.
Right.
You got 27 million people out of the state's 40 million dependent upon a state system. Well, the other straw that we talk about is the Colorado.
Yes.
And one just needs to pick up a newspaper virtually every week. It's like, ain't good.
Right.
It's looking bad.
Right.
And the water, again, because of the same climate shifting, is not there.
Right.
And we are going to see changes, whether we accept them and come to agreement, or somebody imposes them upon us.
Right.
And we don't control that to a certain degree. It seems to me that puts additional pressure on the state system and on that localized system. How do those interplay? I mean, you don't get to say what happens in Colorado, but how do you see that interrelationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think that where we're stuck, where we have sort of policy or kind of decision paralysis on like what's the plan? Like, what are the projects and things we need to do? And I think that this is a really good example because the Colorado River, it's a third of Southern California's water supply, right? And so that is a system that is enormously taxed this year. So it's in such a devastated state that we're just talking about maintaining the power grid for the Western U.S., right? And we share.
And it's not just about water, right? All of these things come with other.
Exactly. So that means that in a year like this one, the State Water Project is at a 30% allocation, meaning we got something from the wetness without snow, and we're moving it as best as we can. But that becomes more important. Right? It becomes more important as a hedge against next year being even drier on the Colorado or California turning dry starting next year. That system could move more water in these conditions and move water safely if we have the right infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So how much do you want to invest in that infrastructure versus other things you could be doing? And I think the problem is we know we need to invest in all of those pieces and how all those pieces fit together so that we can consider risk in the Colorado watershed, consider risk to the Sierra watershed. We're not, we will have our turn. I promise you, we will have our turn when it's really bad on the State Water Project and in the Sierra, but less bad, over in the Colorado. So the reality is, to me, the question is for local water managers is how do all those pieces fit together and come tell the state what you want out of the State Water Project. We get paralyzed because we have a big hangover of all the decisions that came before, all the motivations, right, wrong, or indifferent, that sort of if you build these things, we're going to run them all the time for, all the sort of economic advantage. And I understand where that comes from. I personally think that was true, but it was true in, kind of looking in the rearview mirror. And I think that we need to get real on the fact that we have to invest in making those systems more resilient. It doesn't detract from other investments that need to be made. And there's two things about it. This is one word solving two problems, Charlie, is flexibility. So we need flexibility to respond to hydrologic volatility, and we need flexibility to respond to this idea that we have to be investing in multiple places. And if we just said, I want all the water supply I've ever gotten from the State Water Project to be secured through this one project, and I want all of our Colorado River supply to be secured in perpetuity, and we want to recycle all of that water, that's not going to pencil out for the California ratepayers. We need to build flexibility in the system where we can move water to where it's needed, because different parts of the state need it at different times. The environment needs the water. And those things, moving it to, other uses, can actually generate revenue that really helps with the ratepayer that's working to make all of these investments.
Well, that strikes me that is like the power industry's deregulation, right, where we now have solar roofs and we have battery storage and we have, options that are different today than they were 20 years ago. Right. We don't run the system of just turn it on, pump it and dump it. Right. It's a fully integrated resource we haven't yet come to grips with as a water community.
Right.
And what I'm hearing you say is that we really need to hear from, in this case, this is from the ground up, not from the state down, right? You operate, you see, anybody who operates the system, we get it.
Right.
We're a very tiny minority, and until we get it down into the customer segment, those are really impacted.
Yeah, I think it's both, and it always makes me a little anxious when we talk about, energy deregulation. and sort of because we can see the ratepayer impacts, and
there are certainly lessons that we could avoid.
There are lessons to be learned, and this is where I think, and sort of going back to my previous point, the big systems in the state are big systems, right? And they were built in a different era. Our communities need them differently. That's not a bad thing, and we have to. We can't get trapped by this sort of either or, that if you reinvest in it, it means you're just going to continue the past 50, 60 years of water management. Yeah. We're not. We need some of it, right? We need some of it at the local level. And that, to me, is sort of different from the water piece. The state and federal governments have a huge responsibility in putting the projects together that stabilize the state and federal water supplies or the Colorado River. And the locals have a huge responsibility in saying to state and federal officials, we need this much of this because we're going to invest in X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. What that does for me as a state water manager is to say, okay, because this is one of the things I tell our state water contractors all the time. Does California need the state water project? Do we need to reinvest in, conveyance? And do we need the Delta Tunnel? Absolutely. Do all of our state water contractors need it in the same way they did when they signed up decades ago? No. And that's okay. And that's the flexibility I'm talking about, the people flexibility of how we think about supplies and getting them to where they're needed. And I think flexibility is important to respond to climate volatility and also rate volatility.
So at the end of the day, it really becomes that about customers and its politics, right? And what are people willing to accept, willing to compromise, willing to move on? We don't do a great job on that either. Again, just like we do is we point at each other. It's your fault. No, it's your fault. And at the all simultaneously, while we're all at fault, the system continues to degrade and deteriorate and become less reliable.
Right.
So I guess the question I would ask when you get into the issues, you have to be able to educate.
Right.
Right? What does it take? What are we doing, and how do we make it affordable? How do you get beyond those political constraints?
Right.
It strikes me that the speed of politics is something we can't handle much either. Right?
I would agree with that. Yes. Yes.
Our institutions are not designed to move quickly and nimbly.
Yes.
So how do we get, the folks in the Capitol, the folks in the halls of administration, the folks at the city council, the folks in the local water boards, all of those alignments have to be in place.
Right.
So how do we get there?
Yeah. So I think that, we've always argued about water in California. No big surprise there. But I want to go back to this flexibility idea. So if I just put out there that I think one word, flexibility, is helpful with climate volatility and rate volatility. With flexibility comes a need for greater transparency about what's happening, because you need people to trust you, right? That you're going to put it to good use in California and that you're going to take care of the environment. Californians want to take care of the environment. Mm-hmm. And so when we think about that flexibility, but that transparency gets us, I think, are new opportunities to define how infrastructure and our ability to get infrastructure online and manage it in a different way can help two parts of California that I think historically have been left out and still feel left out. And that is, what are we doing for the environment and how are we going to do it? And can we make sure that every Californian has reliable access to clean, safe water? And I think if we open up the conversation to attract those kinds of benefits, then I think we can start to, and we have that target, we got that 9 million target, right? We can start really articulating how this is meant to work for the California water ratepayer, for our economy, for the environment, and for those Californians who have not really benefited from the last many decades for a whole bunch of reasons. I think a couple of subtle things maybe for the outside Sacramento world, which is most of the world, we have accomplished a couple of key things that are foundational. One, the state has done, I think, really excellent work on making sure that when we have a drought, we don't have as many people who are then reliant on bottled water or big tanks. It's not a good look for California, fourth largest economy in the world, and we've got communities that are relying on big tanks of drinking for years after a drought. We have made enormous progress on that, and I think we started with more than 1 million people in that situation, and my last check, it's less than 600,000, and we're making progress every day, and I expect that will be lower, before this administration is done. That's an important thing. The second important thing that we've done is we have started to digitize our water rights, which again sounds like a snoozer if you're not close to the topic. But I had legislators calling me in the drought of 2021, and they're saying, "Oh, Director Nemeth, I heard something, and it can't possibly be true." But is it true that water rights that are sort of known are written on a piece of paper and stored in some facility in West Sacramento, a big warehouse? And I just took a long pause and I said, well, that is in fact true. Hard to believe, but boy, how hard is it when Mother Nature is not providing enough water to meet all legal rights? How do we work through that in those moments? We're going to see more and more of that. So the state has put in a lot of money to digitize and make those records available so we can understand it in real time. And that has to be absolutely foundational for California. Look what's happening on the Colorado River, right?
Yes.
We're having a reckoning, and it's a tough reckoning. We have our own reckoning in California, and because we are going to get more years when Mother Nature does not provide, and we're going to have to be able to function more nimbly in that instance.
Oh yeah, water rights is where it really
Yes.
gets complex.
Yes.
I think, as you're right, it's kind of like, I've got my property right? I
Well,
own
for
a piece
sure.
of property,
Sure.
but my house ain't there anymore because things changed.
Right.
And now what?
Right.
Right. So how
Right.
does that get sort of, I don't want to say redistributed, but it's how does that get dealt with on who really has the ability? Because it's not as simple as, well, we'll just create this new system and everybody will be great. And so
Right.
you still have to be able to go through in the very specific level of who has what right, who has access to, and then how do we reconcile that fairly?
Yeah.
And all right, so I'm going to come back to the politics for a
Yeah.
second. Because again, you've had the opportunity to work for at least
Yes.
two governors, and you've
Yes.
been through these
Yes.
cycles, and we're getting ready to make that
Yes.
change again. Completely non-political. I don't care who it is, but clearly there's going to need to be some kind of education,
Mhm.
setting of the table for a new governor, a new administration,
Right.
and a new legislature. We keep
Right.
churning through new
Right.
people. Every
Right.
time we think we've
Right.
got somebody educated, somebody new arrives,
Yeah.
and we got to start over
Yeah.
again. So what, in your eyes, really needs to change
Mm-hmm.
as we go into a new political administration?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things. One is that because water is managed at the local level in California, I mean, my experience is, governors don't necessarily come in with a water agenda. We've come in with infrastructure agendas that include water, and I think it's been hard. It's proven to be difficult to do in our current sort of regulatory landscape. So I think that something that is more thoughtful than an infrastructure agenda, something that is more comprehensive along the lines of what we've been discussing, is going to be important for a governor to understand. And it will become wildly apparent when we have a drought, because everybody has lots of expectations of a governor when it stops raining. And we do want to get out of, and I think that's something we did, as you pointed out, 2 governors. I was part of the Brown drought and I was part of a Newsom drought. And, in the Brown drought, we did that 25% mandatory conservation because that was the tool that was available to us. We heard from a lot of our water agencies. We heard from a lot of people about that. So then we adapted and tried to tailor it. And when we had the drought during Newsom, one of the things we said was we really need a goal where we're not, the extent to which we are spinning into a water supply emergency every time it stops raining is not a good place to be. So that really started us along the lines of, okay, we need something comprehensive. We need to start understanding what's holding us back. We need to, and even if some of the bigger things are hard, these foundational pieces that I mentioned are important. And so I think I would say, as someone who also worked on 2 versions of governor water plans, this is what I think was really important about SB 72, is that those water plans were really helpful in explaining from a budget sense, like why an administration wanted dollars to do certain things. Because look, we have this water plan, from the executive branch, and it's got some buy-in, from different folks, and we're coming to the table saying this is what we want money to do. And I think what we're realizing it is not a money problem entirely. Certainly this year, when we don't have money, you realize the limits of that approach, right? And we have learned a lot about the other things that are holding us back. And those other things require the California legislature, which is why it's really important that they came in with SB 72. I think just from a governance perspective, not the details of it, which are also important and interesting, but the pure governance of it, to come in and say, this is an institutional stamp from the legislature to help us collectively own the issue that I think desperately needs that kind of executive branch and legislative branch ownership. I will tell you, one of the things that just was in the moment was following very knowledgeable senators when we were talking about the drought, and I was out talking to groups, what are we doing and why, what more do we need to do? And to follow legislators who would stand at the podium and say, we don't have a water plan in California. We did have a water plan. We do. We have had one for a long time. And to listen to that and know the problem is it's not relevant, right? It's clearly not helpful. And so this notion that the legislature, and that water plan was actually, is a mandate of the legislature, but we'd gotten very rote and we hadn't really gotten it together to make it useful. And so SB 72 comes along and says, we're going to make it useful. And so I think that's important. I think that's important for a new governor to understand that plan is now happening, that plan is going to show us a lot about climate. And we all need to get on the same page because it's got not just the 9 million acre-foot target, but we're going to have to get into regional targets. And dollars to donuts, Charlie, we're not going to be able to afford those solutions unless we are taking care of the environment in California and bringing that into part of the solution set.
So we don't have to wait till the second term of the next government before some reconciliation takes place. What is your biggest risk? What's the biggest risk of delay of just saying, okay, we've done these things, we got a cushion, it's a wet year, we got SB 72, we can do some more planning, we'll sort of hang out for a while.
Right.
Because what I'm getting is that there's still urgency of continuing to put a firm hand to the back, and we must continue to move. Absolutely. We cannot sit back, relax, take a breath, and say, okay, what's next? We know what's next.
Right.
So what do you see as the biggest risk?
I think the biggest risk, if we just sit back, is, Mother Nature bats last. It's coming, right? So there's very little status quo happening right now in our sort of climate and the way water shows up. So every year is a new challenge. And I think that those new challenges really do 2 things. They highlight the deficiency of our system, which is painful. But if we don't have a sort of a credible, what's the whole comprehensive picture, then it gets very challenging to, in response to those conditions, it becomes very challenging to keep people together. Those are the moments when people are like, the conditions are too difficult. I'm calling my attorney. We're going for broke. We do a lot of litigating in the water world in California. And I get worried that if we don't make real progress on, the SB 72, not just the plan, but what are the specific things we are now actually doing, finishing, starting to construct that is responsive to this, it's really hard to tell people, in the throes of a water supply emergency to just hang out because we're going to, we're getting
we'll get to it.
We're getting to it. That part is, it feels done to me that there's real limitations with that. So I think that it's a people risk, right? Because I personally think we have a lot of information about what needs to be done. And the challenge is people, and the challenge is how we govern ourselves in Sacramento, how we work, executive branch with the legislature, but also as water managers, how we govern ourselves. And I think it is really a moment to do a gut check on, how do we want to relate to each other in this kind of time of crisis? There's just a human instinct to find the one thing that's going to solve it, or the one person. I'm very wary of people who want to this is the person who's going to
Where's my silver bullet?
Yes, exactly. It's such a human, we all look for that, right? But that is definitely not the path to success here. And it may sound a little bit corny, but I do think the path to success is a deep reflection on our institutions, whether you're a local institution, a state institution, the California legislature, an executive, about the role that we can play and how we show up to start addressing these issues.
Okay.
Again, it sounds kind of soft, but I think it is an essential ingredient.
Well, what I take away from that is kind of the mantra we at Southern California Water Coalition, at least what we try to amplify, is you need to educate to advocate, right? People need the information, whether it's affordability, it's a new project, they got to have the information in which to make an informed choice. The legislature needs the same thing, but the work is never done, right? So you got to get in, you got to do the work.
Right.
It's not enough to hope and to pray.
Right.
You got to get into
Right.
the work.
Right.
So you want to play a quick word game with me?
Sure.
As we wrap it up?
Right. Can I just tell you one
Oh,
thing?
you can. You can.
I worry that it will give the wrong example, but when we feel overwhelmed by all this incoming data and all this uncertainty, we also need to remember that water issues tend to be kind of long duration issues. And as someone who worked, this is 3 governors ago, this was Governor Schwarzenegger. One of the things we used to do with a degree of pain was, back in the days when we actually had whiteout, we would take documents of lots of good ideas and we would white out the date and we would say, guess the year this was our solution set. And I don't want to come off as wildly cynical, but what I do want to suggest is we've been thinking about these things for a long time. The ideas aren't that new. The challenges are twofold that are coming at us that are new, which is the climate volatility and the fact that we need to make sure we're taking care of all of California. But these strategies are ones that we have been aware of and have a lot of information about. And so my caution for, anybody coming in is you also don't have to reinvent the wheel. The legislature has put out great information over the last 20 years about lots of the risks that we have and the limitations. Go take a look at that. We've had blue ribbon commissions. We've had lots of documents that are saying similar great ideas. over the past many years. That's a good thing. We should see that as a good thing, and we should challenge ourselves as people to have the courage to start governing and start making those decisions.
And all of those are in the same warehouse with the archive,
No,
water
no, no,
rights?
no. Some of them are on my bookshelf, but yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So they're still fresh and available.
Yeah.
All right. So let me ask you a couple of quick questions. Give me one word response.
Yeah.
Best day.
Best day. Best day, actually, for me, was yesterday when I spent 2 hours talking to DWR employees about all the work that we're doing and congratulating them on doing the work, because I care about people, Charlie, and people make it happen. I don't make it happen as a DWR director. I have a role to play. But those are the best days, when you're with other people and taking it all in, how much they're making happen in California water management.
And with every best day, worst day that you learned from?
Ooh, worst day that I learned from.
Where you just messed it up good.
Oh, sure. I know that day. I know that season, maybe, Charlie, will you take a season? 2021 was so hard. And 2021 was really hard because we had our big heat wave later. It came really after our April 1. Remember when I told you we're very used to, we call the water year on April 1. That's our average high peak snowpack. All the heat came after that. And what happened was we made a whole bunch of water management decisions before April 1 that we could not undo. And so we lost all the snow very late in that season. And so the other thing that started happening in that year was we had a heat dome the previous summer, and the dryness was something that we hadn't fully integrated into our thinking. And so what then started happening after we had made all those decisions, we made other decisions to put more water into the system. We were releasing from Oroville to deal with important water quality conditions down in the Delta, and a bunch of that water wasn't making it. And that was in part because of real ambient dryness. And so that was something where it was like, holy cow, all of our rule books on a very complex system are now not working. And that was a, oh my gosh moment for sure.
What does trust look like?
Ooh, what does trust look like? That's such a good one. I think trust looks like, maybe I'll start with a small answer and see if it leads me to bigger conclusions. One of the things that I have tried to do at the department is not ask local water managers to integrate or require them to integrate with groundwater and flood and all that, all the other water managers in ways we were not able to do as a department, right? We're a bureaucracy. Our responsibilities have really accreted over time, and we get in our little silos. And so we spent a lot of time really talking about what is it to break those down. It sounds very cliched. But the trust piece of it was, when we go to these meetings and we're starting to talk about these things, how do you feel going into the meeting versus coming out of the meeting? And if your anxiety level is going up at the end of the meeting, that's an indicator that we're not getting the real issues on the table and we're not trusting. And so maybe that's sort of the no of that is the no trust. So some of it is, I think, trust looks like where we can communicate more freely about the challenges that we have in water, and we can do so without vilification of any other partners in our endeavor to govern water in California.
What keeps you awake at night?
What keeps me awake at night, one of the things I've learned as a DWR director, is always protecting the public. And what are the things that can go wrong in our mission to protect the public? And the things that can go wrong tend to be a cascade of a bunch of things going not quite right. And so, 2023 we were looking at those 16 atmospheric rivers that rolled into California. And initially we were thinking about, they were coming in direct hit San Francisco, into, through the Golden Gate into the Delta. And usually what happens when they come in that way, they spin up north and they dump a lot of precipitation in the Sac Valley. And that didn't happen. They ended up moving a little bit further south. That's why places like Monterey really got, hammered. And we had real challenges and losses there, which were tragic losses there, because California was not ready for that. That was an old system in Monterey that we had known with the Corps of Engineers. The Corps of Engineers had it solved in like 1949 and we couldn't get off it. So that's how that year went. But I was watching that year thinking, if these storms, go all the way up the Sac Valley and they're going to drop on the Sac Valley, we're going to lose a levee. We're going to lose a levee at exactly the time the general public is thinking, it's raining. It's been so brutal. It's raining. Surely we're going to, move this water. And we wouldn't have been able to. Yeah. And that's such a profound break with public trust, that's what keeps me up at night. Loss of life and breaking trust with the public. And that usually happens when in our volatile system, a whole bunch of things don't go quite right. So that's what keeps me up.
One word, California's water future.
One word?
One word.
I want it to be a good word. I'm thinking of a lot of different words. I want it to be a good word. I think one word is innovative.
Innovative is a great word. Karla, Nemeth, thank you for taking time to sit and be with us.
Thank you. I've appreciated the opportunity, Charlie.
Well, thanks for joining us on What Matters Water TV and Podcast. We are proud to have brought you these important conversations for the past 4 years. And if you like today's discussion, please go to wherever you download your podcast and give us that 5-star rating. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us build our presence and continue to grow. If you're interested in helping sponsor this program, please reach out to us at socalwater.org and send us a message. And as we close out today's show, I leave you with this challenge. Be a part of the conversation. Be a part of the solution. At the Southern California Water Coalition, we educate to advocate. So as public policy leaders have difficult choices, together we help them make informed decisions. We thank you for being with us. We will see you again next time here on What Matters Water TV and Podcast.